The Federal Reserve Act, Part 2. Stock Issues. Increase and Decrease of Capital. Section 5. The capital stock of each Federal Reserve Bank shall be divided into shares of $100 each. The outstanding capital stock shall be increased from time to time as member banks increase their capital stock and surplus, or as additional banks become members, and may be decreased as member banks reduce their capital stock or surplus or cease to be members. Shares of the capital stock of the Federal Reserve Bank owned by member banks shall not be transferred or hypothecated. When a member bank increases its capital stock or surplus, it shall thereupon subscribe for an additional amount of capital stock of the Federal Reserve Bank of its district equal to 6% of the said increase. One half of said subscription to be paid in the manner hereinbefore provided for the original subscription, and one half to call of the Federal Reserve Board. A bank applying for stock in a Federal Reserve Bank at any time after the organization thereof must subscribe for an amount of the capital stock of the Federal Reserve Bank equal to 6% of the paid-up capital stock and surplus of said applicant bank, paying therefore its par value plus 1/2 of 1% a month from the period of the last dividend. When the capital stock of any Federal Reserve Bank shall have been increased either on account of the increase of capital stock of member banks or on account of the increase in the number of member banks, the Board of Directors shall cause to be executed a certificate to the Comptroller of the Currency showing the increase in capital stock, the amount paid in, and by whom paid. When a member bank reduces its capital stock, it shall surrender a proportionate amount of its holdings in the capital of said Federal Reserve Bank, and when a member bank voluntarily liquidates, it shall surrender all of its holdings of the capital stock of said Federal Reserve Bank, and be released from its stock subscription not previously called. In either case, the shares surrendered shall be cancelled, and the member bank shall receive in payment, therefore, under regulations to be prescribed by the Federal Reserve Board, a sum equal to its cash paid subscriptions on the shares surrendered, and 1/2 of 1% a month from the period of the last dividend, not to exceed the book value thereof, less any liability of such member bank to the Federal Reserve Bank. Section 6. If any member bank shall be declared insolvent, and the receiver appointed therefor, the stock held by its said Federal Reserve Bank shall be cancelled, without impairment of its liability, and all cash-paid subscriptions of said stock, with 1/2 of 1% per month from the period of last dividend, not to exceed the book value thereof, shall be first applied to all debts of the insolvent member bank to the Federal Reserve Bank, and the balance, if any, shall be paid to the receiver of the insolvent bank. Whenever reduction in capital stock of any member bank, or of the liquidation or insolvency of such bank, the Board of Directors shall cause to be executed a certificate to the Comptroller of the Currency showing such reduction of capital stock and the amount repaid to such bank. Division of Earnings. Section 7. After all necessary expenses of a Federal Reserve Bank have been paid or provided for, the stockholder shall be entitled to receive an annual dividend of 6% on the paid-in capital stock, which dividend shall be cumulative. After the aforesaid dividend claims have been fully met, all the net earnings shall be paid to the United States as a franchise tax, except that 1/2 of such net earnings shall be paid into a surplus fund until it shall amount to 40% of the paid-in capital stock of such bank. The net earnings derived by the United States from Federal Reserve Bank shall, in the discretion of the Secretary, be used to supplement the gold reserves held against outstanding United States notes, or shall be applied to the reduction of the outstanding bonded indebtedness of the United States under regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of the Treasury. Should the Federal Reserve Bank be dissolved or go into liquidation, any surplus remaining after the payment of all debts, dividend requirements as hereinbefore provided, and the par value of the stock shall be paid to and become the property of the United States, and shall be similarly applied. Federal Reserve Banks, including the capital stock and surplus therein, and the income derived therefrom shall be exempt from federal, state, and local taxation, except taxes upon real estate. Section 8. Section 5154, United States Revised Statutes, is hereby amended to read as follows. Any bank incorporated by special law of any state, or of the United States, or organized under the general laws of any state, or of the United States, and having an unimpaired capital sufficient to entitle it to become a national banking association under the provisions of the existing laws may, by the vote of the shareholders, owning not less than 51% of the capital stock of such bank or banking association, with the approval of the Comptroller of the Currency, be converted into a national banking association, with any name approved by the Comptroller of the Currency. Provided, however, that said conversion shall not be in contravention of the state law. In such case, the Articles of Association and Organization Certificate may be executed by a majority of the directors of the bank or banking institution, and the certificate shall declare that owners of 51% of the capital stock have authorized the directors to make such certificate and change or convert the bank or banking institution into a national association. A majority of the directors, after executing the Articles of Association and the Organization Certificate, shall have the power to execute all other papers and to do whatever may be required to make its organization perfect and complete as a national association. The shares of any such bank may continue to be from the same amount each as they were before the conversion, and the directors may continue to be directors of the association until others are elected or appointed in accordance with the provisions of the statutes of the United States. When the Comptroller has given to such bank or banking association a certificate that the provisions of this act have been complied with, such bank or banking association and all its stockholders, officers, and employees shall have the same powers and privileges and shall be subject to the same duties, liabilities, and regulations in all respects as shall have been prescribed by the Federal Reserve Act and by the National Banking Act for associations originally organized as national banking associations. State banks as members. Section 9. Any bank incorporated by special law of any state or organized under the general laws of any state or of the United States may make application to the Reserve Bank Organization Committee, pending organization, and thereafter to the Federal Reserve Board for the right to subscribe to the stock of the Federal Reserve Bank, organized or to be organized within the Federal Reserve District where the applicant is located. The Organization Committee or the Federal Reserve Board, under such rules and regulations as it may prescribe, subject to the provisions of this section, may permit the applying bank to become a stockholder in the Federal Reserve Bank of the district in which the applying bank is located. Whenever the Organization Committee or the Federal Reserve Board shall permit the applying bank to become a stockholder in the Federal Reserve Bank of the district, stock shall be issued and paid for under the rules and regulations in this act provided for national banks which become stockholders in Federal Reserve banks. The Organization Committee or the Federal Reserve Board shall establish by laws for the general government of its conduct in acting upon applications made by the state banks and banking associations and trust companies for stock ownership in Federal Reserve banks. Such bylaws shall require applying banks not organized under federal law to comply with the reserve and capital requirements and to submit to the examination and regulations prescribed by the Organization Committee or by the Federal Reserve Bank unless it possesses a paid-up unimpaired capital sufficient to entitle it to become a national banking association in the place where it is situated, under the provisions of the National Banking Act. Any bank becoming a member of a Federal Reserve Bank under the provisions of this section shall, in addition to the regulations and restrictions hereinbefore provided, be required to conform to provisions of law imposed, incurred by any person, firm, or corporation to such banks, the prohibition against making purchase or loans on stock of such banks, and the withdrawal or impairment of capital, or the payment of unearned dividends, and to such rules and regulations as the Federal Reserve Board may, and pursuance thereof, prescribe. Such banks, and the officers, agents, and employees thereof, shall also be subject to the provisions of and to the penalties prescribed by sections 5198, 5200, 5201, and 5208, and 5209 of the revised statutes. The member bank shall also be required to make reports of the conditions and of the payments of dividends to the comptroller, as provided in sections 5211 and 5212 of the revised statutes, and shall be subject to the penalties prescribed by sections 5213 for the failure to make such report. If at any time it shall appear to the Federal Reserve Board that a member bank has failed to comply with the provisions of this section or the regulations of the Federal Reserve Board, it shall be within the power of the said board, after hearing, to require such bank to surrender its stock in the Federal Reserve Bank. Upon such surrender, the Federal Reserve Bank shall pay the cash paid subscriptions to said stock with interest at the rate of 1/2 of 1% per month, computed from the last dividend, if earned, not to exceed the book value thereof, less any liability to said Federal Reserve Bank, except the subscription liability not previously called, which shall be cancelled, and said Federal Reserve Bank shall, upon notice from the Federal Reserve Board, be required to suspend said bank from further privileges of membership, and shall, within 30 days of notice, cancel and retire its stock, and make payment therefor in the manner herein provided. The Federal Reserve Board may restore membership upon due proof of compliance with the conditions imposed by this section.